Welcome to Explore, Explain. This is a long-form video and podcast series sharing conversations with data visualization designers and developers from around the world. Each episode explores the detailed hidden thinking behind a single project or a series of related works to explain the what, the why, and the how of the design process. So let's jump in to today's episode with your host, Andy Kirk.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Explore Explain. This is the season 5 first episode. So they said it wouldn't last this long. They said it shouldn't last this long, but it has lasted this long. And in today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Rebecca Conroy and Duncan Swain from Beyond Words. Rebecca, Duncan, it's wonderful to see you both. Thank you for your time this morning. For the benefit of listeners and viewers, can I invite you just to give a little brief introduction of you both?
Yes, so I'm Rebecca. I'm co-founder and managing partner here at Beyond Words Studio. I look after the sort of operational side of things, make sure everything runs smoothly. Before DataViz, I worked for the BBC in radio originally, so back to the audio roots, and then looking after a lot of their digital properties, especially on the commercial side.
And I'm Duncan. I am the other co-founder and I'm creative partner here at Beyond Words. I look after more of the editorial and design side of what we do. And again, my background was at the BBC, which was where Rebecca and I first worked together. And before that, I was in magazines and newspapers, so I had a journalistic background before that, all of which has kind of culminated in where we are now.
Very good. And where you are now is London and at Beyond Words Studio. I guess the topics that we're going to cover today will begin with a bit of context about the studio and about the origin story and kind of where it is and where it's going. But we're going to wrap around that a discussion about a topic that we've discussed this off air, but a topic that's not discussed that much in the DataViz community, but it's very important, which is about values that one holds themselves, values that a studio espouses, and the values that can then penetrate into the work that we do and the impact it has. It's a brilliant topic, and I think it's something that is timely for where we are in lots of different ways. But we'll get onto that meaty topic in due course. But again, just for the benefit of kind of introductory stuff, could I invite just a little outline of Beyond Words? We'll come into later on about what you do and what you don't do, because I think what you don't do and don't offer is also an important characteristic of what a studio is about. But again, just at high level, what is Beyond Words?
So we're a data visualization studio, but we also describe ourselves as taking complex information and make it easy to understand. Because I think some clients have data, actual core numbers, but others might have a process that they want explaining or an idea that wants explaining. So we've found that we're often brought in for those kind of projects as well. We're based in London, like you say, but we also have opened this time last year, a US entity. So we have someone in very nice Miami Beach, which we were always very jealous of.
Wow.
I know.
What a great choice. What made you choose Miami Beach?
Well, he chose Miami Beach, and then we just said, that's okay, that's fine, we can visit there, that's good. But most of our staff are based here in London. There's 16 of us in total. We work across a whole range of different subjects. We've been going for 10 years. In fact, I think this year is our 10th anniversary, so we might have to have a bit of a party.
Happy anniversary, congratulations.
Thank you. It's just been fantastic ever since the start. It's every kind of month is different. Everything is, it's when we used to work for digital and the internet, when it started in the sort of, well, not when it started, but late 1990s, early 2000s, they used to call the internet the Wild West. And I think DataViz has been a bit of a Wild West for a while, and it's sort of starting to sort of settle down a little bit now, I think, but it's still very innovative and there's still loads of fantastic projects and things going on.
I think you're right. I think there's something about where we are in 2024 that, you can mark different points in time when DataViz took off as a thing, but I do think we're almost at the other side of seeing that growth and seeing it move from the fringes and the shadows into something much more mainstream. And I think it is a point in time where we can just sort of look back and see how this has grown up and matured, and it's something that we're going to look at, especially with respect to the topic of today's conversation in a bit more detail. But I think, I think on that point that you raised there, Rebecca, about language and terminology, I think it's a really interesting thing. I'm coming towards the end of working on the new edition of my book, and that obviously forces and confronts you to think about glossaries and definitions and distinctions. And I found it really painful to think about what exists these days as useful distinctions. What we talk about and think about as being data viz isn't necessarily what customers and clients out there think of as what the thing that they need. How have you seen that kind of labeling, marketplace offering evolve over the last 10 years? Perhaps the biggest contrast would be when you started thinking about founding Beyond Words. Is what you're doing now different to how you kind of conceive what it would be back then?
Well, I think, we've thought long and hard over the last few years really about our messaging around what we do. So we have introduced this idea of, we do broadly two things really. It's data viz and it's information design, but all of that is in service to explaining abstract or difficult to understand subjects or sets of data. So I think that's one of the key changes. We've always had people coming to us for those two things. And sometimes people come either armed with data, or they want us to find data, or they have, information around what it is that they do, and how do you then kind of portray that? Because they often struggle to, we're working on a government project at the moment around a complicated idea and subject, and working hard to pick that apart and help them, because they're very close to it and they can't really see the wood for the trees, and they're not experienced at explaining these things, so we can help them get under the skin of it and then play it back to them in a way that a broader audience can understand. So I think that's kind of like one of the main differences in our approach to how we communicate what we offer and what we do.
I think infographics is the key term that people often used to, when we first started, everyone said they wanted an infographic, and a lot of things were static at the time. So we still occasionally get people asking for infographics, but I think people have definitely moved on, and there's a language now that clients understand as well as practitioners that starts, because for ages, I think when we were doing workshops, the first thing we did was trying to explain the difference between a data visualization and an infographic, so that people got the idea of what was different. So I think people are starting to understand kind of different ideas of the language, but it was the formats that were changing since we started. They're definitely much more varied now in terms of interactives and animations and dashboards and presentations, and not just sort of
I'm thinking back to 2014 and maybe the few years before that. Was that era of those terrible long tower infographics, 900 pixels wide, a million pixels long for embedding in Facebook, and they kind of thankfully disappear. I guess the equivalent now, which is not as rubbish as that stuff was, is the kind of scrolly telling piece, but that's obviously got a lot more merit, I would suggest, overall. But I think that's a really interesting point about the maturing nature of the clients, and they kind of know a bit better what they're looking for, and even what to put into Google to find companies like yourself to help with that. Because if you're looking for someone to do a poster design, you kind of know it's graphic design. If you're looking for an architect, you're looking for an architect. But a data visualization studio sometimes is quite an enigmatic thing to land on, and I guess it's just through the longevity of this term just feeding into search engines and getting a place has certainly helped that journey. Now, you talked about sort of 10 years, and you also introduced the kind of a little bit of your background. I mean, again, just going a bit deeper into sort of where you were before Beyond Words started. So, I mean, Rebecca, you mentioned there at the BBC and doing some of the audio stuff, and so when did you get into data viz? What was that? Was there a light bulb moment? Was it a kind of gradual sort of force that drew you towards it, or was it just something that happened kind of, I'm now a data viz person?
I think, so one of the projects that I'm most proud of that we made at the BBC was the BBC Good Food website. So we work with the BBC Good Food magazine people, and took their recipes and worked with them to turn that into a website. And it's not necessarily data viz, but it is that organising of complex data and making it compelling, engaging, easy to understand, and all those kind of elements that do make up data viz. So I think we were actually doing it without realising that we were doing it.
Yeah.
And also the journalism background that we both have has that. And I did English literature as a degree, so I don't come from like a design or a maths background or anything, but it is that whole sort of storytelling perspective of bringing to things. So to bringing data and complex information, but then also thinking about how do you make that engaging so that anybody can understand. I think that's always kind of been in me. So it was quite an easy transition through to sort of data visualization.
Well, absolutely. And I think language, is really important in all this. When we look at data viz maybe as a communication channel, well, writing is communication. And the elegance of language, the clarity of language, sometimes you want to flower it up to make it emotional. Sometimes it's more instructive and detached. And the more I spend in this subject, the more I realise there's just so many things we can draw and deposit onto data viz as a thought process that, even if you're portraying recipes and instructions to make those recipes, it's still part of the same, maybe Venn diagram, if not the exact same cluster of activities. About yourself, Duncan, what would you kind of echo as your kind of backstory that led to this?
Yeah, so being involved in journalism is like structuring information to impart to other people, and just the things that I learned in magazine and newspaper journalism about the importance of headlines, subheads, captioning, all of those kind of things, all of that comes into play. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it's something that we talk about a lot if we do workshops and things. It's data viz, it's a visual language, but it means that the words that you do use are super important. They've got to be super tight. Everything's got to be optimized. There are different ways of doing headlines. Do you give away the story in the headline? Do you tease the story in the headline? Whatever it is, but there's still the words that you structure around any kind of data viz are so important for helping people understand what is on the screen. So, and then also as Rebecca and I moved from she was in radio journalism and I was in print journalism, moving into that kind of digital online world, we got to play with a lot of different brands. I mean, we worked across Top Gear, Radio Times, so lots of TV listings, information. We relaunched BBC News internationally, international version of iPlayer, international versions of BBC Sport. So, having to structure all of that information in a digital format that, again, helps people understand, the information architecture that you're putting around stuff, all of that, is just super important and has helped inform the things that we do now. So it's just picking all of that stuff apart, and then how do you bring it back together again to kind of inform this different type of work that we do now.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, that's crucial for us. And it's part of the reason that words is in, the title of our studio, because we go beyond words, but words are just so important.
Absolutely. And I think it's, you mentioned that kind of notion of editorial thinking. I bore people to death probably on my courses by the amount that I stress that is probably the biggest differentiator between a good, effective visualization and one that's just didn't really need to exist, because it's having that judgment that you can't really teach. It is very instinct, because it is ultimately a subjective choice about what you show, how you show it, how you describe it. But to have that natural inquisitiveness and that natural curiosity that you want to find out something, you want to know something, or that you inherit that on behalf of the audience, I think they'll want to know something. I think they'll want to have a deficit in understanding a bridge by this thing. So that thinking to me is perhaps the biggest influencing factor that makes the biggest difference, but also just the thing that you probably need to get through experience and wisdom. So that's why it's important for people, or certainly of my generation, to still be relevant in this world. All these cool kids coming through now, that you can't replace wisdom. But so you've talked there about kind of your respective backgrounds, and what's the sort of bridge from those jobs that you had there to let's start a studio? Because there's obviously something that's, the BBC as an organisation has lots of cachet in terms of it would sound like a very inviting place to work, and the possibilities, I'm sure, to move around and do different things is quite tantalizing. But there's obviously something that involves a degree of courage to then say, right, I'm going to go from this nice organisation where there's a certain comfort blanket to let's go out there, roll the dice, and try something different. What motivated that? And I guess actually an extension there is, why a studio rather than just freelancing? I'll let you fill the gaps.
Shall I start?
Go on.
So for me, I think I'd done a lot I could do at the BBC. I'd actually started, it was my Saturday job when I was 16, working in local
Right,
radio.
okay.
And then when I was at university, I went there in the holidays and all that sort of stuff. And I had a fantastic time at the BBC and I absolutely loved it. But I think by the time I was ready to leave, I felt like we'd done everything you could possibly
Yeah.
do there. And I didn't feel as challenged anymore. And I didn't want to work for the same organisation for my whole life. So I wanted to try and try something different. And it was the whole internet as the Wild West and a startup was fantastic. I'd loved that. And this felt like a new area. It felt like it was new and exciting, and you could break things, but you could make things, and you could,
Yeah.
it was, and I think it still is, just really pioneering. And I think for me that made it really, really exciting.
That
But
spark,
the skills
yeah.
that we have exactly. And I think the skills that we have are quite transferable. And I think we're good at creating and running teams. And I think that's why we would have always thought about it as a studio rather than something on our own, because we know that we can't do it. We've got quite complementary skills, but we can't
Yeah.
do everything between us. And we need good people around us in order to do really, really good work. It takes it to that next level. So that's sort of my thinking.
Yeah, I think we'd worked very well together at the BBC, and the way we've always divided the things we do differently because we've got different skills, but very similar values and kind of ambitions for what we
Yeah.
want to do. And I always describe as Rebecca used to run interference for me at the BBC, so she was very good politically at dealing with obstacles, whereas I was just like a bull in a china shop, so could annoy people, I think. We'll get to some of that later on, I'm sure. But so yeah, I mean, I always had like big creative ambitions and wanted to do things differently than the BBC was doing things. And having Rebecca there, she was my boss at the time. She still is, really, but just allowed me to be able to do that. And so and I think one of the things I learned there is that, and one of the things we're both quite good at is recognising what we are good at. So there are some things that I am very, very good at, but it's a small set of things, and there are lots of things that I'm not very good at. So what I've always tried to concentrate on is trying to find people who are very, very good at what they do, and surrounding myself with those people who are very, very good at what they do, and allowing them to do it because I can't do it. And so everything we do here is very much a studio effort. We're not particularly well known as individuals within the industry because we don't ever push ourselves forward as individuals. Everything is kind of like studio projects. We don't identify individuals for work that's done here because everyone touches things. So it's all about kind of finding the people who are very good at what they do, which are lots of things that I can't do, and surrounding myself with them, and then empowering them to get on and do the things that they need to do good work for good people, really.
I think that judgment of what you can't do is absolutely vital, because as we know, data viz is so multidisciplinary. It's such a wide spectrum of things that you kind of have to be good at. That, I'm sure we can collectively sit down and list a handful of people that we recognise have got this unicorn nature of doing all these things. But again, I think part of my own sort of freelancing journey has been to say, actually, I can make peace with the idea that I'm not going to be that person, and I can't do that. And as long as I'm sufficiently kind of conversant in knowing what that is roughly about, I'll find a way to either compromise and not do it, or find others to cover that gap. And we all start from different points of strength. I do obviously a lot of work with people who are either new in their career through students, or are looking maybe to divert their careers through the courses that I deliver. And a lot of them from the outside get a bit overwhelmed by the prospect of the amount of things that they need to sort of master. And I try to downplay that and say, look, you can't do all that, but find the thing that you are. What is the starting point? 'Cause we all come at this from one strength, whether it's a sort of creative flair, whether it's a technical capability, a statistical, mathematic-y kind of background, and we've all got a strength, and it's about what you do then with the rest of the stuff.
Yeah.
But I think what was interesting there that you mentioned about the teamness of everything, and I was wondering about that because the team size that you've got, in theory, kind of enables you to kind of cover all these bases of skills and capabilities. Do you go for specialists, or do you go for generalists that can still cover lots of areas, or do you go for the kind of ideal generalist specialist in one body? How do you kind of, I don't know, fill the squad, shall we say?
Well, I would say that we're broadly specialists in particular areas, but have an interest in, they have to be conversant with how other parts of the process affects their part of the process. So they have to be, they have to recognise that other people are doing their work around them, and they have to know. It's like the designers we have here have to have a kind of like mathematical, analytical bent, because they have to broadly they're being kind of briefed with spreadsheets a lot of the time, and having to we have very structured spreadsheets here, or data sheets, and they have to be able to understand them and then translate that into the right kind of device and thing. But at the same time, they need to be very, very good graphic designers. That's graphic design is such a huge part of what we do, and there's lots of different kinds of thinking and training that go into becoming a graphic designer. So, and project managers as well. They are the project managers that we have here are very good at being organised and all of those project manager things, but they tend to have a creative side to them as well. So there's a lot of interest in that creative side of things as well. So I haven't explained that very well, but I think it's broadly specialists that kind of stray a little bit outside the typical specialist's role. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right, Andy, as well. There are a few unicorns in the world, but there aren't that many. And I think there's nothing to be ashamed of being really strong at one thing and not having to think that you have to do lots of different things. If you can be, really good at one thing, then that is really valuable. We like people to be inquisitive as well, which is sort of, kind of curious, because they need to understand what they're actually visualizing or explaining, and that it's got to go to sort of another audience and things like that. So there is a natural sort of curiosity that we like in people as well.
Yeah, I think there's two things there. So a lot of kind of personality traits, I think, that are important for us are informed by a lack of ego. And that lack of ego is that then helps you recognise that you need other people around you to help you do the things that you need to do. And secondly, they acknowledge the fact that we are working in lots of new areas that we don't know about. So there's a need to self-educate around the areas or subjects that we're working in, but also around kind of data viz as an industry and how you do data viz. Because it's still, you've been teaching for years, we've been teaching in different places for years, but it's still an up and coming industry that that where people have to learn a lot. So there's still a lot of self-education around data viz, around the subjects that we work in, and around how they fit into the process here and working with other people.
Well, that's it. I mean, there isn't, there are programs out there that people can get qualifications in data viz and leave uni with these certificates, but there isn't an army coming out of a factory of just data viz ready people that you just drop into a role and run with it. And I kind of like that, because I like encountering people who've come from really different backgrounds, who have got these sort of shared inquisitive skills and desire to kind of communicate well, but they might just have a totally different sensibility that really kind of, brings different ingredients to all this. And, as we know, that one of the characteristics of data viz that is simultaneously frustrating for some, but also liberating for others, is there isn't the perfect solution. There isn't a single right path. It's, so many different fingertip judgments. And I think what's matured in the field in that last, maybe the decade that we've talked about since you got set up, is maybe some of those voices that, for different good reasons, perhaps at times reduce Dataviz to a slightly simplistic, always do this and never do that treatment. I think they've that mindset at least has kind of been pushed a little bit to the flanks, and it's now very much, the kind of cliche, know the rules to then break the rules, which is fun, really. It's exciting. That spark that you mentioned, Rebecca. So I think it's I mean, we're all just patting ourselves on the back, but it's the right field to be in. Let's face it. I just wondered again, going back to 2014, just to kind of close off the origin story. The field was still quite small then, quite starty-uppy in a way, if that's a term. Did you have any other studios, and that could be both within Dataviz and outside, that you were able to, I don't know, sort of draw inspiration from? I like how they do business. I like how they've set up. If we could emulate how they look or how they've been configured, that would be a good basis. And by extension, were there things that you could draw from, like the BBC? That team worked well there, so let's try and take that and recreate it, but in an external capacity.
Well, I'll talk about one aspect. So in terms of kind of an organisation that I've always looked up to and admired and wanted to, I would say a North Star in terms of creativity and quality of work, particularly back then when there weren't as many people in the field, was New York Times, I think, and the stuff that they did was just extraordinary. And, we wouldn't match them. But having come from a news background at the BBC, partly, we did, as having relaunched BBC News and worked with the news team a lot there, I just, really loved the stuff they did. So I think, and that was always having something that felt slightly unattainable, but a good kind of guiding light for us. That was, for me, in my mind, that was kind of like, wow, they are so good at what they do. I would love to be as good as them at some point. But
and I guess
yes,
just interrupting there. Sorry, Duncan. I think what's also useful about that reference for you is that if you're in amongst a culture that is about breaking news and about the diversity of news topics, you'll even more appreciate how they're able to mobilise their graphics team to make these things about a completely different topic than it was yesterday, but do so with novel ideas but effective ideas, I guess.
Yeah, just amazing work. So, and maybe I don't look outside as much as I used to, but certainly at the start, I think that was an interesting source of inspiration for me. What about you?
I mean, we did used to spend a lot of time going around agencies and talking, because Duncan in particular pioneered using external design agencies within the BBC, which they didn't used to do. And so we wanted to try and find the best design agencies to help us design these websites that we were creating, and work with some really strong agencies out there. And I think learning from them and learning about that was really key. So I think, and then in terms of your sort of team question or transferring the knowledge from the BBC, I think some of that, definitely some of the, even just some of the basics of corporate land. So making sure people have an annual appraisal and making sure they have one. Do you know what I mean? Some of the structure that was really important to us in the BBC, which sometimes in smaller studios, or if you're starting up, you either don't think about that or know about it, or sort of it takes a while to get your head around those things. We were instigating those really early on. So I think some of those kind of, we could choose what we wanted to do as well. And trying to reduce meetings. I remember within 2 weeks of starting in the studio, someone said to me, what's the biggest difference? It's like, I'm not spending all my time in meetings. The meetings are either working on a project or talking to a client, which was fantastic. So getting rid of all that. But on the flip side, I think as we're now not on the client side, we're on the sort of studio agency side, but we had been on the client side for such a long period of time, we can absolutely understand what the clients have to go to, especially in these big organisations that we work with. So we understand the potential politics that they're dealing with or the stakeholders they're dealing with, and all that sort of kind of sometimes bureaucracy, sometimes necessity that they have to go through. And I think that helps us sort of be a better studio as well.
I think so Rebecca's brought up an important kind of part of my career where I learned a lot, which was that key decision we made at the BBC to use external design, which seems like quite a small kind of decision, but then that led me to, and I think I visited over 100 agencies in UK, US, parts of Asia, Australia, trying to find who were the right global partners to do different things for us. You know, whether they're creating, a video app to house iPlayer content and how that would be structured, or all of the different websites we wanted to launch in different countries. How did we relaunch Lonely Planet as a new kind of revolutionised digital entity? So, and allowing me, I always insisted on going to their offices, talking to the founders, and so we got to know a lot of different people and see a lot of different organisations operating in different ways, and it informed the size to which we wanted to grow, because and we've kept in touch with lots of those founders now, so we can have good conversations with them about how things are going in their industries versus our industries. It all tend to be creative agencies or user experience agencies or different things like that, but that's really helped us kind of form an idea about what we wanted to do. And you don't realise at the time when you are doing these things, it seems like a chore to fly all the way to Australia to interview five.
We probably wouldn't do it now for climate anyway.
No. But it's just. But we were working in Australia anyway, so
yes,
Lonely
that's
Planet.
true. That's true.
So it's just formative things like that you don't really feel formative at the time. But for the BBC, it was quite revolutionary to do that kind of work, and it made the work that we do really effective, because we work with really, really good people who were doing really new, groundbreaking things in these digital arenas that were new at the time. So it was
absolutely.
a very good experience.
Now, I think it's a useful sort of jumping point then to move into the notion of values, because I guess part of your harvesting of inspiration, insight from these visits was also to pick up a few ideas about how the best ones operate, and the way that they do so, and the values that they espouse and kind of create as a sort of force field that shapes their work. So I'll give you the mic to sort of talk about, first of all, what are the values that are important to you as an organisation?
We have quite a few. Well, no, there's about 8 or 10, but I think there's sort of there's things kind of within the studio, and there's the external, well, not external, but how we kind of work with people around us. So sort of the impartial honesty and transparency slightly comes from the BBC a little bit as well.
Yeah.
Well, that was sort of, impartiality was definitely a BBC kind of news element, but for data that's really important. But it also is if you're working with a client and you need to talk to them about timelines, or you need to talk about something, being honest and transparent is really key. I think there's something in our values about sort of trying to push the boundaries as well, and being creatively ambitious, and trying to be innovative. And even now looking at how we can use AI and things and all that sort of stuff, where is everything going? How can we keep being at the forefront of things while kind of retaining the foundation of our values as well?
And
go
ahead, Duncan. You carry on. Yeah, sorry.
And then the focus on kind of quality and excellence. I know everyone would say that, and of course everyone says that, but that focus on quality and excellence, and trying to kind of instill that into everyone that works here. And one of the things that we always try and imbue in people is this need to make the thing that you are working on at any particular time as good as it can be before you pass it on to the next person. So it's trying to cross all the T's, dot all the I's, do all your checking, just get it as polished as you can make it before the next person sees it, because it means that they don't then have to kind of go back through your things and start picking up on things that might need to be improved or changed or tweaked or whatever.
Like a pride in one's work, a pride in one's craft, sort of thing.
Yeah. And then, as Rebecca said, there are lots of things that we do for people around us or the world around us. So this is about giving something back to the community within our industry as a whole, and working with universities and things like that, and making sure our team is as inclusive as it can be and as open to differences within people as it can be, and just basically these ideas of being thoughtful and considerate and kind to the people that work with you, and considering them and thinking about them. I think one thing that a strength that Rebecca and I have come to realise after lots of kind of psychometric testing at the BBC and all those kind of things is that we have quite high IQ and being able to sense in people around
EQ,
us.
not
Sorry.
Maybe we've got
yes.
IQ as well, but
yeah, definitely not. Maybe not IQ. EQ. Sorry. So
EQ,
having that. Yeah. So being able to sense if there are, if people are feeling differently about things or aren't feeling okay. So we're good at picking up on those things, I think, and helping them through it and being reassuring to them, and just being thoughtful and kind and considerate is very important.
I mean, there's so much to go out with this. I think the first question I would ask is, did you kind of sit down and define these, in a sense, proactively? Or did you feel the need to define them in reaction to different, I don't know, events or situations where you felt you didn't quite have the sort of formalised, consistent guardrails to say, here's how we handle? Because I guess the purpose of values is always something like it's not like a standards or a rule book. It's in situation X, here's the things that might shape how you respond to that and what actions you take. So yeah, back to the question, was it something that was kind of reactive or proactive, or did it just sort of morph into a thing that you realised, oh, actually, we've got some values here?
I think, as with all these things, it's probably a little bit of both.
Yeah,
I think we were kind of embodying a lot of them anyway. I did a course about 5 years ago. It was one of the government, I think it was called, it was like a growth accelerator course or something like that for businesses. And one of the things they sort of start off there is, have you got your vision and values and all this sort of stuff? And I remember coming back to Duncan and we've got our vision and values, but have we actually written them down anywhere? And how are they shared or how are they formulated? So we started to have a look at them, and then we actually did an exercise, like a post-it exercise with the team to be able to get their input as well. So it did become like a proper sort of group exercise, and then we sort of pulled them together, turned them into sort of written one-liners that we then shared back with everybody. And I think having written them down and shared them in part of that exercise means that we, as the founders and the sort of owners and the partners of the company, we have to make sure that we can't expect the team not to embody them if we're not embodying them. So there are things about kind of, we have this one line about trying to do 70% for good. Now the team absolutely hold us to that. And, every year at this time of the year, at the end of our financial year, not only are we looking at the finances, but one of our data journalists will be going in and working out, have we hit that 70% for good target? And it is a really important, sort of thing for us, but also for the people that work with us as well.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I mean, I don't think it's fair to apply cliches, but it does feel like the young generations are good people. I'm not saying that we weren't, but I think that they are especially good people. Though you've got almost like come pre-built with good values. But it's kind of interesting that it's not you sort of shine the light on your colleagues, it's them kind of holding you to account on those things, which is a nice sort of twist to organisations. But I also think maybe there's a size thing. I've worked in big organisations and I've worked for myself, and the values that were often kind of espoused in big organisations just felt like they were just going through the motions, that they felt the need. But I wonder have you found that the size of your team means that actually, we own these, we collectively agree on these, and we actually don't just pay lip service to them. We practice them. We put them into all the things that we do.
Yeah, definitely, and I think and our team do bring things up if they feel like something's not being represented properly, which fortunately isn't very often. But even on things, we're trying to do a lot of work around climate and our response to climate at the moment, even within ourselves as a studio, and we will get picked up on things if people don't think that we're doing the right thing. And I like to think that when I was younger, I was also quite good. When I was 14, I was knocking on doors collecting money for Friends of the Earth. So I think, you do sort of start with that, and the key is not to lose those values. I think, because I think as you get older, there's a risk that you can get a bit jaded and a little bit like, oh, it is just lip service. And I think making sure that you are fulfilling them all the time is really important.
Yeah, I think something that really helped crystallise my thinking in journalism. I worked in some quite cutthroat journalistic organisations, and I saw people who weren't as kind of reliant on those values, and I had a pivotal point where I had to make a choice. It was a stark choice between doing the right thing and doing the wrong thing, and I did the right thing, which hastened my end at that time at that organisation. But that was, it made me realise, well, that's not an organisation that I want to be at. And
right.
So, I think there are talking like this makes me realise there are moments in my career that I can look at and point to and say, yeah, well, actually, that was a super important time for you. So yes, I think they are. So the body, so the values are embodied by us, and there are things that just naturally reflect us as people. And I think that's the only way values can really work, I think, for us here. They have to be lived by us and believed in by us and come from us. Otherwise, they are false and people won't pay attention to them. And we just, we try and employ people that or surround ourselves with people that think the same thing, and, same with clients as well.
Yeah, I mean, we do sort of, after the pandemic, we ended up putting a clause in all our statements of work that basically said that, thinking of the mental health of our employees, we're not going to, we don't work outside working hours or weekend, and we very, very occasionally, like maybe once a year or something, someone might have to work a few hours outside working hours if there's but that to us is really important, that people do have that work-life balance. And I know some people, especially when you're younger, you want to be doing more and you want to do things, and if they want to do things in your own time, that's totally fine. But I don't want it to be a studio thing that's demanding that you're doing something, or a client, like some of the sort of, I don't think they do it as much now, but some of the older kind of bigger marketing and ad agencies that used to sort of demand that you worked crazy hours, the sort of Mad Men style thing. We're not, that's not something that works these days and never really did, I don't think. So it's just being honest about that with clients as well, so they know right from the start to expect.
And I've been there as well. I've been in organisations where, half of the month in a magazine you're working till 11 o'clock at night because the first 2 weeks no one can make up their mind what they wanted, and I knew I never wanted to do that in the future. So again, something else from the past that informs where you want to be, and we want people who work here, we really focus on people enjoying their time here, so and that comes in different formats. So it's having social things to do, it's having a career. We always talk about people having a career and not a job here, and we want people to feel that they are developing and learning new things and are progressing while they're here. It's not just about filling a space for a small amount of time. We want people to be here and stick around and learn new things and feel part of a team. We always have people that are in the studio always have lunch together every day, and that's something that I've always done since the old BBC days. It's not like press ganged into, right, you sit down now, I want someone to talk to. It's about
it is about him wanting someone to talk to.
Well, it's partly about that, yeah. But there's something really nice about we've always had a big table that we all sit around. We all tend to eat around about the same time, and we don't talk about work, that's for sure. But it's a nice social time, and I think it's an important part of what we do.
It kind of family vibes, I think, that kind of sitting around as a family for an evening meal, that sort of thing. But I think that, again, there's different things I want to pick up on there, but I think the first one is, I've seen this line that you've got about the caring for people that work for us, caring about the industry that we work in, and then about the broader world around us. I think that there's obviously deliberacy in that sequence, because we've talked about words and their influence there, but clearly it feels like it's, if you get the first one right, that will help the second one go right, and then that will help the third one go right. So obviously, get the people first and foremost, get the people with the right values, and look after them.
I'm not sure that in intentionality was there in terms of that structure. But I think you've nailed
Let's go with it.
I
Let's
think
go
you're
with it.
right.
Yeah, I think we
As
can
clever
work
as
with that.
delivers it.
We might borrow that line, Andy.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also think, you mentioned there, Duncan, about looking back at sort of formative years and experiences, and we were talking just before we start recording about this idea that having values is perhaps a, a a mature thing that you're able to do after distance of time as an organisation, but you probably need to have had, correct me if I'm wrong, those experiences to kind of know what you're about as individuals. What do you think are important? What do you think are less important? What do you think work? What do you think don't work? So I guess it's probably easier said than done for people to just land on the right values. Maybe you need a few bumps and bruises along the way to then say, right, not that, this over here.
For me, I think that's absolutely, 100%. Yeah, it's things that I've picked up and experiences I've had that have, shaped my opinion of what I want to do and where I want to be. Yeah, definitely, it's all from experience for me, and fundamentally being a type of person that wants to do the right type of thing. I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of them are within you anyway as to who you are as a person, and that doesn't really change. So I think you could be 22 and setting something up, and you still kind of know sort of what your principles are.
You can feel it at least. Yes.
Yeah, and they're not. So I think at any age you can start to set some values. I think we've evolved even in the last 2 or 3 years. I think we've added things in or thought about things a lot more. I mean, we talk a lot. I know it's kind of like an in thing to talk about neurodiversity at the moment, but we've talked a lot about that over the last couple of years, and that's something that maybe we were sort of aware of before, but it wasn't kind of articulated, or we didn't know how we were supposed to sort of think about it and incorporate thinking about it within sort of our day-to-day sort of how we work and everything else. And that's definitely something that we're launching within the team next week, our sort of a neurodiversity policy, which makes it sound really kind of formal, but it's not really. It's about practical things that we can do to make sure that we're as sort of diverse as possible, really.
And we've been doing training on that for over a year now, in different ways. And I think part of that is I have quite a high degree of ADHD, which again helps and hinders in different ways. I think it allows you to be very good at certain things and not very good at others, but also score quite highly on, not quite highly at all, on autism scales. I'm kind of near that kind of boundary, which isn't surprising when you look at the kind of things that we do and the kind of ways in which we work. But I think it's working out what I've had to work out over time is how do I manage that in myself and in my work, and working with Rebecca has allowed me to do that and work in this way in which I surround myself again with these people that can do the things that I can't do. But you have to be kind of self-aware enough to do that and accept these things, and but you open the door to those things and explore them and examine them and see how it helps you, really, I think.
Yeah.
And that's what we've tried to do here. But then it also makes you realise that there are lots of other people that are like you, and you need to try and create an environment in which they can work as well. So how do you help people who are in similar situations?
Absolutely. And it's it's something that isn't just about tokenism, is it? It's actually the possibilities, the strengths, the opportunities that can come from an inclusive team like that. Isn't just about saying doing someone a favour. It's about let's mobilise this. Let's get the best out of this. Absolutely. And I just one of the interesting things there as well about going back to your point, Rebecca, about your team holding you to account at the end of the year and look at the figures. Do we hit the 70%? On the note
They're more interested in that than the finances, to be honest.
Yeah. But on that note of finances and the kind of commerciality of all this, I guess there are points where there's a trade-off, and I guess the reason why it's 70% and not 100% is because there's a reality of paying bills and keeping the lights on. And I'm not suggesting that the 30% is you working for the Trump campaign or the North Korean information agency, but it doesn't mean that those other clients or projects you work on are bad, just maybe different in nature. But how do you sort of judge on a sort of, I don't know, case by case basis the clients that you're working with that, I don't know, maybe skirt around the edge of, pure data viz for good and more just data viz? You've got to make a choice of sometimes this is a decent project to work on. It may not tick the purity of some of those other boxes, but it's still worthy of us kind of collectively saying, yeah, it's something to do good with.
Yeah, and I think we want the option to work on those kind of projects as well, because they can be really interesting. I think there's definitely a line that we won't cross. So we did get approached quite a few years ago, didn't we? Almost when we first started, by an agency representing the Russian Ministry of Communication or something, which just sounded dodgy.
Wow.
So we that's an obvious no. But there's other things where there is a bit more of a line where you start sort of talking to a potential client, and then you think actually they just want us to do some greenwashing on something. They want us to make their data look good for some of their sort of, and so those are something that we wouldn't do, and we have turned down money and therefore turned down clients because of that. It doesn't happen very often because we don't often get in the situation because we know which ones to kind of avoid, I suppose.
And you've obviously put yourselves out there and saying, here's what we are.
Yes.
Coming to us with something that goes against that, it's probably going to be a waste of your time as much as ours.
Exactly. And the sort of the other 30% is still kind of like really interesting projects, really good clients. They're all trying to, they're still, they might not be an NGO or something. They might be a big international corporate, but they're still, the people we're working with are usually really, they believe, they often share exactly the same values as we do. It's just they might be working, in the marketing department of a big corporation, but that doesn't mean to say that they don't kind of think the same way that we do on things.
It's probably an hard question to answer, but is there one recent case study or project or client that you've worked on that you feel that is the quintessential demonstration of what we want to work on, and the work that we did completely kind of just espouse these values that we feel are really important? If there's one you could hold up and say that is the classic Beyond Words project.
Was it Cascade?
Yeah, probably Cascade is one of our favourite projects we've ever done, because it mixed this kind of breaking new ground, big ambitions, good client, communicating to people for a very good cause, and so that was a landmark piece for us, I think, and partly because of the scale of it as well. So that was working with the Gates Foundation on a project around neglected tropical diseases. We set up a 30 by 5 metre.
Unfortunately, we didn't set that up.
No. That's what we requested was a 30 by 5 metre faceted screen. So it had 3 parts to that screen that kind of enveloped the audience, and the audience were 200 CFOs and CEOs from different drug companies, and what the drive of the project was to make them realise that free drug donations were essential to fighting neglected tropical diseases. So things like guinea worm, elephantiasis, things like that in different countries. So and it was a 4-minute motion graphic. We used very, very new technology to animate the data elements within it. Had a really, really strong story, really nice script behind it. We worked with a composer for the first time and had some really beautiful, well thought out both music and kind of overlaid effects on things, and it was really, really powerful. And I remember being in Geneva when the screen was set up and then seeing it kind of projected onto that screen for the very first time was actually quite emotional, and kind of like a real high point to see it there and working and hearing it in this massive auditorium. So I think that was really powerful and whenever we share it to people, everyone's people really enjoy it.
It is a wow project. I remember it very well.
So I think that was kind of like one of our favourites that we've done.
So this, not so much to try and position this as a quick fire round, but it's kind of a quick fire round. I'm just thinking that obviously you mentioned before that as founders and as the two heads of this organisation, you perhaps do less hands-on stuff than you once did in the day. But as leaders, as in the roles that you've got, just what would you say keeps you awake at night? What I'm trying to do is give people a sense of a day in the life of or day in the life in your shoes, and rather than say, well, at 8 o'clock we wake up and then we go and have breakfast and then we do a project meeting, but just some examples. So what are the things that keep you awake at night in respect to running the studio?
For me, it probably always is what's the pipeline like? The sort of practicalities of what have we got on, what have we got coming up, and then we always have what we call nice problem to have, which is when suddenly we'll get an influx of things and it's like, right, how are we going to manage all these different things that have suddenly come in? So yeah, I think it's, and you speak to any kind of business owner in any arena, and whether it's sort of services or manufacturing or whatever it might be, and I think that's always the sort of, the key thing is making sure that we've always made a call not to get external investment into the studio, and partly because of the values, I mean, we may one day, but we'd need to work with people that matched our values so that we could still keep doing the 70% for good and things like that. So it means that you do invest a lot of the money that you earn back into the studio. So yeah, we don't have any big backers or anything.
Yeah. So I've asked Rebecca there what keeps her awake. I'll ask you, Duncan, then what excites you on a day-to-day basis.
So you're going to ask me the same question.
No, let's go for a more positive.
So new projects and new clients, I think I always get excited, and it could be a small project, could be a big project, but I mean, I do like ambitious things, but that could be ambitious in terms of it's a new subject area or it's challenging data or a challenging thing that we have to represent. I really like getting under the skin of new things and really understanding. We have, we say here, you can't design what you don't understand, so that's a really important part of what we do is understanding these subjects, and I like getting my head around new complicated things. And I think that's partly the kind of one of the ADHD superpowers is this kind of like hyper focus on a subject or an area, and
that's interesting.
Rabbit hole, and yeah, sometimes it's not very good. It's going too long, but yes, that's what
brought out.
Yeah, but that I think I find that exciting, and that drives me.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if I flourish that well in those bits as much as the thing that always excites me is the moment when you've grasped something, where either you've that's the way to tackle this, or I now see this thing, but you have to go through a bit of pain to get there.
Oh, definitely, it is painful.
Yeah. Now you touched about Cascade and the composer that you work with. So the next question was, like, what's the sort of furthest thing away from data viz that you might ever find yourself doing? For example, let me give you a little context. 2 days ago, I found myself photographing toy cars to try and illustrate an idea in my book, and it was just such a weird, I'm trying to light my room and find the right angle, and I thought, this is just a weird thing to find myself on all fours trying to do a photograph. What's perhaps apart from the composer, what's the least sort of typically data viz thing that you ever find yourselves doing?
Well, I think there's something around kind of the studio itself. So, for instance, commissioning a sign writing painter to come in and decorate part of our studio and create things like that little plaque up there that used to be outside our door. So, and he's a properly skilled, so he's got those old time skills for doing like sign painting for pubs and businesses.
Feels very sort of mid-century style. Yeah, beautiful.
And he's a young guy who's locally based. Again, we like to kind of spend money locally if we can, because so he's based in Roman Road, which isn't far from here. Jed Palmer, his name is, fantastic, very talented sign writer. And it was kind of selfish in a way, because I then spent 3 days with my daughter sitting in the studio with just us watching him doing his, and it was just extraordinary to watch. But that felt pretty unusual for.
Does he have that kind of
data viz?
I don't know if that thing that you put against the wall. What's that called?
There is a name for it. I don't know what it is.
Stop you smudging the paint.
Yeah. So that's one thing. But they also have these extraordinary. So he also brought another guy with him, to help him at certain points. But they have these amazing boxes, old wooden boxes that you pull apart, that's got all of their kit in it. They're covered with paint and things, but they, of course, they're always beautifully kind of illustrated with their brand name. Amazing stuff. I just loved it, and we had such long conversations, me and him. Now, I'm sure he should have only been there for a day and a half, but it was 3 days because I just kept talking to him and stopping him doing. But I love that kind of passion for creative stuff and finding people who are really, really good at what they do. That's a really, really important part of. There always has been in my career, is finding people who are at the pinnacle of what they do and trying to work with them.
Yeah.
Try to find an excuse to do something with them.
Yeah, that's nice. I like that. I'll come to you on this one then, Rebecca. Is there one thing you wish you'd known about life in a studio before you start the studio? One thing why didn't anyone tell me about this? And it could be good or bad.
There's probably quite a lot of things. I mean, a friend of mine recently set up her own business, and she asked me for some tips on things, and I ended up writing like a 4-page document on you need to remember this. It's actually not. I don't think it is as complicated as it needs to be. So I think maybe the one thing I should have known at the start, or wish I'd known, was that I didn't have to treat it like a big corporation at the start.
Right.
You don't necessarily need all these things in place. You can wing quite a lot of it.
Yeah.
Until you sort of, feel that you need it. My husband has this phrase of just enough, just in time, and I think that's quite a good phrase for those things. Yeah. Sort of what do you need now versus what can wait? And I think I probably went a bit too far on trying to get everything organised really properly at the start, and probably didn't need to do it quite like that.
Interesting, yeah. And then lastly, I'll come to both of you on this one, which is just one moment, one thing, one anecdote that you feel has just been the most rewarding from your time at Beyond Words. This was the moment when I felt just most satisfied or content or happy. What would those things be?
I quite like, we've started it again actually, when Bake Off, Great British Bake Off, or I don't know what it's called in America, but that is on. It's just
called the same thing, yeah.
Isn't it called? Anyway, we have everybody in the studio. Well, you can, sometimes we make it compulsory sometimes. At the moment, being kind, and you don't have to, but everybody who wants to can bake something. And so every Tuesday, someone will bring in a bake, and then we've just carried on doing that. And I think, to me, I just love that, because it's a sign of us working together. It's not anything to do with DataViz, but it is about having pride in something that you've created, and it's and sharing that with people that you work with and colleagues and things. And that to me kind of makes me, it's just a really lovely little moment, a little warm glow. And yesterday we had some really nice brownies, which also help as well. So I think that's not anything very DataViz, but I like that.
Oh, it's better that it's not DataViz, actually. Yourself, Duncan?
So I think there's two related things. One thing is when I sit back and look at the client list of who we've worked with, and and who we still work with, I look back and I think I'm not sure that, I mean, Rebecca's got one other ambition for someone that she would want to work with that I'll let her talk about in a bit, but I think so that's really that's very pleasing to me to see that. But also it's when we talk to other people, like we're naturally not very good marketers or trumpet blowers for what we do, and when we talk to other people that either we know or about the things that we do and what we have achieved and the people that we've worked with, we don't talk about it in those terms, but the reaction of people, they say, well, you've worked with all of those different people, or those are the types of, people are always amazed, but it doesn't, we're never amazed ourselves, I think, because we're so close to
immersed in it, of course, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I think we've done impressive work, and we work with very impressive clients, and you could say we're lucky to do that, but I think there's a lot about making your own luck, and again, all informed. I think a lot of it is informed by your values and the things that you kind of reinforce in the work that you do and the people that you attract in terms of talent and clients. But your ambition for a client would be?
Obama. It's always been Obama. It will always be Obama. Yeah.
How come how can we make that happen if he's watching this episode? How can we, what...
We're really good and we'll make an impact for you.
Yes, exactly
Just
right.
give us some
Yeah.
data. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
who knows? I'm sure there'll be a Obama Foundation type thing, or some entity that will
There
emerge
is.
in due course.
Yeah,
Oh,
there
there we
is,
go
I
then.
think. Yeah.
No, that's wonderful. But I think just to close on that last point you made, Duncan, about, I don't know if we can call it sort of celebrating successes, but I guess as leaders and founders of the studio, you probably have to. I'm going to sort of draw experiences from sort of football here, and my team, Liverpool. Jurgen Klopp always talks about not getting too excited by victories, not getting too down by defeats. And I guess there's a sort of a band that you have to sort of stay within emotionally to not let things get too carried away. But I guess as long as the rest of the team recognise that, yeah, that's been a good thing. That's worked out well. Then that's pretty good.
Yeah, I think you're right. We're both very even keel people, if you know what I mean. We don't go too high or too low. We try and maintain that. So yeah, I think you're right. But yeah, we try and we do celebrate with the team, and we have a little bell we ring when we finish a project, don't we? In our stand-ups every morning, so people.
You say celebrate with the team, which sounds like some massive party, and then you go, yeah, we ring a bell.
No, but I think we do recognise the work that people put in. I think we try and both lead from the front and behind. So if there's a decision to be made, we can help make that decision. We won't always be right, and we always say that, but we're definitely there to make those decisions, and we are quite often turned to for those decisions, which is absolutely right. If there is a mistake made, then we are accountable for those mistakes because it's our studio, this is our work. But if there are successes but that's where we kind of push from behind, and we're trying to just make sure everyone feels that the effect of the good work that they are doing and how everyone's kind of part in a successful project is really important. So we don't stand up front and say, well, that's due to us, because it's not due to us, it's due to everyone around us doing the things that they do.
Well, I think if there's a gong maker in Bricklake, maybe you should commission a big gong, big dramatic sort of, here's a project finished, rather than a little bell. I mean, we took that thing, but
we do use an audio gong, don't we, for like really big projects, the ones that have taken forever.
Well, that's been wonderful. Thanks ever so much for your time and for your insights into. We've covered a lot of ground there, but I think the values that you've spoken about there are wonderful in and of themselves, but also how you've kind of put them into practice. And credit to yourself and the team for the successes that you've had and ongoing accomplishments I'm hoping will continue to happen. So thank you, Rebecca, thank you, Duncan, and thank you to everyone out there. Catch you soon on another episode of Explore, Explain. Bye for now. To see more information about today's episode, including some links to key sites and resources mentioned, please visit my website at visualizingdata.com. Here you'll also be able to find details about my book, information about my public and private training courses, as well as over a decade of blog posts. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking, subscribing, and spreading the word. See you next time.